Hello, my name is Barbanek, and this is my research proposal for Human Factors Psychology Fall 2019. And for my research proposal, I want to look into the mnemonic use in the elderly with low cognitive impairment. So, mnemonics are a form of memory aids that anyone can use and can be used to great effects. We talked a bit about mnemonics in our memory section with things like chunking and imagery and stuff like that. So generally it's just a system that helps people remember stuff better, which really relates well into the next subject, which is what is mild cognitive impairment. So it's pretty much anyone that has a disease like Alzheimer's or dementia or some kind of injury that lowers their mental capacity with heavy regards into memory. So my hypothesis for this test is that the simple mnemonic devices will increase the memory of elderly people with MCIs or mild cognitive impairments with daily tasks. For some related studies that kind of go hand in hand with this, I found two different articles in two different issues of the experimental aging research, which is pretty much the go-to scientific research of aging journal. The first one is a study done by Yesavage and Jacob, and it's the effects of relaxation and mnemonics on memory, attention, anxiety in the elderly. So in this study, they really looked into how mnemonics and relaxation kind of work together, but for the purposes of my study, the important part was the increase in memory using mnemonics, which is relatively straightforward, and it's what we expected, but it's good to see that there's actually data. The only problem with this study is it doesn't really go into any discussion of any kind of cognitive impairments. The next study I looked into is Remembering Mnemonics by Markle, Kramer, Camp, and Anschutz. For this one, they did a 3-year follow-up on the effects of mnemonics and did a response survey after training a group of elderly people. They asked them 3 years later if they still use them. And in this study, after a certain amount of time, the elderly adults seem to kind of drop off how much they use them. And while this isn't really what's expected in our results, because of the more reliance on these memory types and how they will significantly improve the subject's day-to-day life. And for the third study, this was from the Educational Gerontology journal, which is another major elderly geriatrics journal, and it's a spontaneous use of mnemonics by the elderly individuals by Camp, Markley, and Kramer. And if you notice, that's actually two of the same people who did the 3-year study, but this time they used it a short period of time, and in this study they found that over the course of a short amount of time they will use it a lot more frequently and lean on that a lot more, and over time eventually that it does fade away. So the main problems with these studies that I found is they don't really go into the actual reactions when the elderly people have any form of mild cognitive impairment, and also the subjects, the sample sizes were very small, about 20 to 30 for all of them, and they really more came off as case studies and didn't really fully encompass a broad sphere of people, just very specific circumstances, which both of those, but the good news for our research is that it does give a very positive results that mnemonics does help with the elderly, and they do seem to use it for a while afterwards. So it's good information to kind of base the theory off of, because it does help explain how the elderly kind of react to these kind of techniques. For my study, the ideal subjects will be age 75 to 85 with some form of mild cognitive impairment. And to kind of test that, we'd run them through the levels of consciousness, which is just basic questions that most people have gotten when they're in the hospital. Do you know where you are? What's your name? What's the date? Things like that to kind of base how conscious they are. And this kind of acts as two purposes. The first is that with this, they are allowed to give their own consent to be in the study, and it does show that they are still only have a mild form of cognitive impairment. And for a sample size, I think the bigger the better. Again, as the previous research study shows, the sample sizes were very small, and I think having as big as possible will be better, hopefully in the hundreds. And for researchers, kind of going off that point, I think students would be grad students would probably be the best candidates for this because there's a lot of them, and the tests are relatively simple and can be run by pretty much anyone. I think the best places to do this would be at retirement homes or skilled nursing facilities, pretty much anywhere that has a high concentration of elderly people that may be willing to participate. For the test, I think the best way to test is something that goes right into their day-to-day lives. Not only does this make them more familiar and makes the test a lot more easy to comprehend, but it also makes the research data itself far more applicable for human factors. We can see how they'll respond and how different situations can affect that. So I think for our test, we can use a simple grocery item list, give them 10 grocery items and 30 seconds to memorize as many as possible, and then give them 30 seconds to write down as many as they remember, and then count out of 10 how many they got correct. For the how, we'll break it into 2 days with 3 tests. For the first test is just a basic, same 10 questions. And then after they do their first test and we record their results, we'll do a short training that will be read from a script from the student, and will encompass first what is mnemonics, and then different aspects like chunking and imagery. And then directly after that, we'll do a second test with 10 new food items, but the same process. And then 2 weeks later, we'll run again, same 10 item, 30 second test with to see how time kind of reacts, going back to those previous 2 of the studies to see how time really kind of interacts with this. And of course, we'll need a control group, and this control group will have all the same 3 tests. The only difference is it won't be read the training script. For expected results, we do expect to see a significant increase after the training when compared to their initial test, and a slight drop off with time. And but we still hope to see that slight drop off in time is still higher than the initial recording, saying that they have improved even over a 2-week period. For the control group, we may see a slight increase due to familiarity of the test and people just becoming more comfortable with it, kind of know what's going on, but not a lot of change, especially with the follow-up 2 weeks later. We don't really expect to see any change from their initial result. Some of the possible error that we may see could, as we were saying before, it comes from the familiarity of the test. May cause some errors in test scores, might increase them, but with the food items being changed every test, and so we shouldn't really see too much change in that, along with the fact that it's a very something that most people are already relatively familiar with. We don't really expect to see too much. For human error, we may see an increase with students running the test instead of skilled researcher, but since the tests are so simple and they'll be reading from a script, we should really avoid any major problems and the errors should be minimal. But the main purpose of this is getting information that we can relate into human factors and taking the information and see how these mnemonic devices can be implemented to help people and whether or not these memory tricks are actually useful in people with mild cognitive impairments. Because they have these impairments, it is expected that they would have harder times, so this can act as a form of a crutch and help them be better at memorizing things. So, awesome. Thank you.